Welcome to the debate. There is a silent crisis happening right now, and it is entirely missing from the evening news. Men are disappearing.
Yeah, not in the wilderness either.
No, not in the wilderness. They are disappearing at kitchen tables, in empty driveways. The quiet weight of reality it's crushing them.
Right. It's the unpaid invoices, a lost wife.
Exactly. A son drifting into opioid dependence. And, what do? They fight reality. They bargain. They drink. And the resistance itself is what kills them.
Because cortisol floods the system.
The heart fails. The mind fractures. So today we are confronting a terrifying psychological precipice. This brutal, silent war against reality itself. And the core question we are looking at is this. Does survival demand we conquer our suffering? Or does absolute power only come when we surrender to it completely?
It's a heavy question.
It is. And I argue that clinging to a lost past triggers a lethal biological cascade. True power demands Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of fate. Acceptance is basically the only mechanism that metabolizes pain into resilience.
Well, I hear that. I really do. But I take the position that demanding a man love his devastation is, frankly, a psychological death sentence.
A death sentence?
Yes. Natural resistance is a necessary survival mechanism. Forcing a premature surrender doesn't save a man. It accelerates his destruction.
Okay, look. Let's ground this immediately in the sheer biological reality of what happens when a man refuses his fate. Because the body keeps the score.
It always does.
Right. When you reject reality, chronic stress accelerates biological aging. We are looking at cardiovascular disease, severe hypertension, immune dysfunction, and ultimately rising rates of suicide.
The physical toll is undeniable, yeah.
These are the direct physical consequences of refusing what is. So we must adopt a more fati. We must want nothing to be other than it is. Not in the past, not in the future. And, this isn't just ancient philosophy.
You're talking about the modern clinical side.
Exactly. If we look at the clinical research by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun on post-traumatic growth, the mechanism is proven.
Okay, wait, but let's pause and clarify what Tedeschi and Calhoun are actually saying here. Because I think you're making a massive leap by equating post-traumatic growth with this immediate forced surrender to fate.
Well, it's not about immediate capitulation. It's about the physiological shift.
But it sounds like capitulation.
No. When people face profound adversity and choose to lean into it rather than fight the fact that it happened, they report deeper relationships and greater personal strength. For the listener, this is really about understanding how the nervous system operates.
Right.
Surrender is not weakness. It is the ultimate psychological weapon. It stops the threat mode activation in the amygdala. When you stop resisting, you literally force the brain to rewire. You shift out of a cortisol-drenched panic and re-engage the prefrontal cortex, which, that allows you to actually navigate the disaster.
Look, I absolutely acknowledge the lethal physical toll of chronic stress. The sleep architecture fractures, the inflammatory markers rise, the capacity for joy narrows until it just completely vanishes.
Exactly.
But you are flipping the framework into something incredibly dangerous. If you're listening to this and you've just lost your livelihood, hearing someone say you need to love your fate probably makes you want to throw your phone across the room.
I can understand that reaction, sure.
And honestly, you'd have a point. Demanding a man love his ruin is unnatural. It pathologizes basic human grief. It creates a second suffering on top of the initial trauma.
A second suffering? How does acceptance create a second suffering? The suffering comes from the friction between what is and what you demand it should be.
Because you are layering guilt and inadequacy over his grief. Social psychology reveals the truth about self-concept clarity, an identity threat. When a man loses his business, his identity shatters.
True, but he has to...
Biologically, the brain processes this identity loss the exact same way it processes a physical attack. Panic is a biological defense mechanism.
It is, but it's not a sustainable one.
Maybe not forever, but the old self was safety. Stripping it away instantly, demanding he immediately embrace the void, it leaves a man completely defenseless against the dark. The resistance you want him to drop? That resistance is what's keeping him from total psychological collapse. It is human.
It is human to resist, yes, I agree. But that resistance is exactly what traps him in the burning house.
I don't see it as a burning house.
Let's look at the applied analysis of Marcus Hale. Just as an example. 39 years old, his wife is dead after a short, brutal illness.
A tragedy, yeah.
The small contracting business that fed 3 generations of his family is totally bankrupt. His son is severely addicted to opioids.
The absolute worst case scenario.
Exactly.
Hale stood on the cracked concrete of his empty driveway and cursed the water-stained ceiling of a house that no longer felt like home. He cursed the tremor in his hands.
And he had every right to curse those things.
He did, but that cursing kept him trapped in allostatic load. And just for the listener, allostatic load isn't just feeling stressed. Think of it like running a car engine in the red for years.
Right, the wear and tear.
It is the actual biological weathering of your organs from chronic adrenaline and cortisol exposure. He wanted the past restored, and then the spring flood hit his Midwestern industrial city.
The flood, right?
Hale drove into the rising water to save a locked storage unit of tools. The current took him. Lungs burning, debris striking. He nearly died fighting the dark water.
Because he was fighting for his livelihood. But he only survived when he stopped. He let the river take him where it would. As the water closed over his head, he surrendered. He thought, want nothing to be other than it is.
Wow.
When rescuers pulled him onto a higher bank, coughing muddy water, he looked at his ruined tools in the ruined street and whispered, "This too." That is the exact moment power returned.
Okay, we have to stop right there. Do not erase the struggle from that story to make the philosophy sound cleaner.
I'm not erasing anything.
Marcus Hale did not start with surrender. He fought the current first. He waded into freezing, contaminated water to save what was his. The fight is the instinct.
But the fight didn't save him.
The fight is what keeps a drowning man kicking toward the surface. If he had just walked into the water and said, "Amor fati," he would be dead.
I am not erasing the struggle, though. I am saying the struggle almost killed him, and the surrender saved his life.
But what happens the next morning? This is where your framework just falls apart for me. The adrenaline fades, the cold reality sets in.
It always does.
He has warped, rusted tools. The bank's representatives are arriving with papers to take the house. Complete surrender in that moment risks total passivity.
No, that's a misunderstanding of surrender. If you tell a man whose life has just been destroyed that he must simply love his fate, you are inviting him to lay down and let the world roll over him. You risk the quiet erosion of identity turning into a permanent disappearance.
You are equating surrender with passivity, and I think that's a dangerous misinterpretation. They are completely different mechanisms.
How so? Let's break down Albert Bandura's research on self-efficacy. Hale did not become passive. The surrender actually allowed the action. Because he accepted the total ruin, he returned to that damaged storage unit every morning without the delusion that things were fine.
Well, sure. He couldn't deny it.
He didn't try to rebuild the massive contracting business that was gone. He sorted the warped and rusted tools as if they still held value. He took small, intensely uncomfortable actions.
Very uncomfortable.
He met the bank representatives without bitterness and said, "Take the house if he must. It was never mine to keep forever."
But how does sorting rusted tools give a man his life back?
Because of how the nervous system processes achievement. According to Bandura, self-efficacy is built through mastery experiences. When Hale cleaned a single rusted tool, it wasn't just a chore. It was a behavioral experiment. His nervous system registered that completed action, dropped the cortisol, and released a microdose of dopamine as evidence of a new capacity. Surrender didn't stop him from acting. It stopped the exhausting inner conflict that was draining his cognitive and physical resources.
Okay, I see the mechanics there.
It allowed him to move lighter, without the rigid self-image of the powerful foreman who insisted he must never fall.
Well, if we're going to talk about the power of this philosophy, we have to look at the man who actually invented it. Let's look at Friedrich Nietzsche.
Ah, Nietzsche.
This is the architect of Amor Fati, a brilliant classical philologist, a professor at the University of Basel at the astonishing age of 24. But look at the brutal consequences of his life.
His physical health was terrible.
Terrible is an understatement. He endured crushing migraines, failing eyesight, digestive torments that forced him into total isolation. And what happened to the prophet of surrender?
He collapsed.
In January 1889, at the age of 44, he collapsed in the streets of Turin after witnessing a horse being beaten. He threw his arms around the horse and he lost his mind. He never recovered his mental clarity. He spent the remaining 11 years of his life in a fractured, broken state, dying in 1900.
It is a dark history, yes.
Amor Fati grew from a broken mind. We have to ask, was this a desperate coping mechanism of a man whose reality was unendurable? Does this philosophy actually save men, or does it destroy them?
Look, I'll admit, when I first studied Nietzsche's Final Days, it shook my confidence in this entire framework. It is a profound and tragic irony.
It's hard to ignore.
It is. But I don't believe Nietzsche's physical collapse invalidates the psychological framework he constructed. His nervous system failed due to organic illness, yes, but his insight into human suffering remains clinically flawless. And honestly, we don't have to rely purely on a 19th century philosopher here.
We don't?
No. We can look at modern clinical observations, specifically acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT.
Which is built entirely around psychological flexibility, not an absolute love of devastation.
Exactly. But the mechanism is the same. ACT proves what Nietzsche intuited. Imagine you are in a tug-of-war with a monster over a bottomless pit.
You get exhausted.
You are exhausting yourself. The only way to survive is to drop the rope. When individuals stop struggling against internal experiences they can't control, their psychological distress measurably reduces.
The dropping the rope metaphor is powerful. I'll give you that.
The biological parallel is undeniable. What we resist persists. The nervous system remains locked in threat mode. But what we turn toward with deliberate attention can be transformed. Nietzsche warned that the refusal of reality is the great sickness. Fighting an uncontrollable reality accelerates biological aging.
That is a compelling metaphor, dropping the rope. But have you considered the sheer cognitive overload this demands of a person in crisis? Let's analyze Joseph Campbell's image of the cave.
The cave you fear to enter?
Yes. The cave holds the treasure, but it is terrifying. The cave is the place where the familiar identity must be left behind. Exposing a man to his deepest failure, asking him to walk into that darkness and embrace it, demands immense cognitive bandwidth.
But avoiding the cave guarantees he never finds the tools to survive.
Yes, but you can't force him in prematurely. Carol Dweck's research on learning mindsets shows that to grow, setbacks must be treated as information.
As data.
As data, right? Rather than as verdicts on a person's worth. But a man drowning in grief lacks the executive function to process data. He is purely in survival mode. When a man has lost his wife, his business, his pride, he doesn't have the luxury of detached cognitive reframing.
He has to find a way.
If you force him into the cave before he is ready, if you demand he love his situation, he will internalize that failure as a permanent personal deficiency. And the outcome of that is fatal. The statistics are stark.
Suicide.
Social isolation, substance dependence, quiet disappearance. You're basically asking a bleeding man to analyze the chemistry of the knife.
That is a brilliant way to put it, and I agree the danger is absolutely real. If the process is rushed, the long-term negative effects of chronic self-blame and withdrawal lead straight to those elevated suicide statistics we mentioned earlier.
Exactly.
But that is exactly why the resistance to reality has to stop. The bleeding won't end until he looks at the knife. And there is an escape route. The escape route is meaning.
Meaning?
Look at Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. Frankl observed this in the concentration camps. Those who could locate purpose, even in the absolute smallest acts of dignity, retained a thread of resilience. Purpose is the lifeline.
But, finding purpose in a concentration camp and finding purpose in an empty suburban driveway are very different psychological landscapes.
The landscape changes, but the human hardware is exactly the same. Let's go back to Marcus Hale. His son appeared at his door one freezing dawn. Thin, shaking, eyes hollow from opioid withdrawal.
A terrible sight for a father.
Hale did not lecture him. He didn't demand the boy be the capable son he used to be. He provided a solid shore.
Hale asked the exact question Frankel's doctor had once answered when treating a severe depressive. If I had gone first, would you have carried this alone?
That is a staggering weight to put on a shattered man. To ask Marcus Hale to suddenly become the anchor for an addicted son when he has absolutely nothing left himself. His house is gone, his wife is gone.
But that weight is the exact mechanism of salvation. The suffering suddenly found direction. Generativity research proves this.
Generativity?
Yes, for the listener, generativity is about turning your pain into a protective or instructive presence for the next generation. It shifts the brain's focus from internal rumination to external utility.
So he focuses outward.
The scientific literature shows that men who engage in generativity report significantly lower depressive symptoms and higher life satisfaction. The wound becomes a weapon. When Marcus held his weeping son, the meaning crystallized. The suffering hadn't been random. It had prepared him. It stripped away his ego so he could be the solid ground his son could finally reach. He stopped demanding that his losses unhappen.
We must acknowledge the brutal difficulty of that transition, though. Empathy requires us to name this honestly. Letting go of the old self, the capable contractor, the man who provided and protected effortlessly, is a death of its own.
It is a kind of death, yes.
The old self was not just an ego trip. It was a psychological safe harbor. The discomfort of acting differently, of taking smaller work, of admitting need, of resting when his body demanded it, that creates immense anxiety. This isn't a movie montage.
No, it's real life.
The third movement of this pattern, where a man has to reshape his self-image through gradual, uncomfortable behavioral experiments, is agonizing. You frame amor fati as a sudden, glorious liberation in the river. But the reality is that rebuilding an identity from the ruins of failure is a slow, humiliating crawl.
It's hard, yes.
The pride protests. The doubt constantly whispers that he is finished.
It is a humiliating crawl, I don't deny that for a second. The doctors had warned Hale about his rising blood pressure and heart strain. When he tried to start small handyman work with his salvage tools, he failed. 3 times the jobs dried up, or his body gave out.
But this is where Carol Dweck's research truly applies. Because he had dropped the rope of his ego, each collapse was studied like a map rather than a death sentence.
Using the data.
He noted where pride had interfered, where exhaustion was ignored. The 4th time, the work held, not because of luck, but because he learned to move differently, lighter, without the rigid self-image that demanded he never fall. The power of amor fati isn't that it makes the work easy.
What does it do then?
The power is that it removes the resentment that makes the work impossible.
I hear the mechanics of it. I see how the dopamine replaces the cortisol. But we are left with a man who is fundamentally diminished from what he was.
Diminished?
Yes. He lives in a modest, rented place near the river. He fixes what others cannot pay for. Yes, he sits with the grieving. Yes, he found a quiet kind of usefulness. But we cannot romanticize the devastation that put him there. The family business is still gone. His wife is still dead.
The losses are permanent, yes.
The culture tells men that strength means never needing help, and when they fall hard. The struggle to endure that fall deserves deep, profound respect. If we simply tell men to love their fate, we risk bypassing the very necessary, very human stage of rage against the dying of the light.
But the rage...
The fight against uncontrollable circumstances is what built human civilization. We don't just accept the flood, we build dams. We don't just accept disease, we cure it. If everyone simply whispered this too when disaster struck, we would have no progress, only passive endurance.
That is a critical distinction to make, but I would frame the application differently. Amor fati does not mean you don't build the dam. It means you don't stand in the floodwater screaming at the sky that it shouldn't be raining. You accept the reality of the water so you can accurately, calmly lay the bricks. The refusal to accept reality is what blinds men to the tools right in front of them.
I suppose that's true.
Men who never find a way to love their fate carry elevated inflammatory markers forever. Their sleep architecture remains disrupted, their social networks narrow to nothing, the heart bears the strain until it literally breaks.
The physical cost is absolute.
The alternative we're discussing is not the absence of suffering,
The alternative is the possibility that suffering can be metabolized into a form of strength that no longer requires the world to be gentle. Heo walked those same flooded streets in every weather. He watched the water with reverence. He didn't just passively endure. He became a presence for others who were still drowning.
Yet the tragedy remains intact. He became a shore for his son, but only after losing everything else. And the psychological warning I want to leave listeners with here is that the margin for error is zero.
Zero.
If a man attempts this surrender and fails to find that meaning, if he drops his ego but fails to connect with Viktor Frankl's lifeline of purpose, he is left entirely in the void. He has abandoned his defensive resistance. He has let the river take him. But what if there is no higher bank?
That's the risk.
What if the water just pulls him under? That is the danger of abandoning the old identity too quickly. It risks a psychological collapse that is unrecoverable.
The danger of the void is there, but the alternative is guaranteed destruction. The longer the nervous system remains locked in threat mode, fighting a past that cannot be changed, the more certain the biological and psychological collapse becomes. We are talking about basic survival.
Survival, yes, but at what cost? A man is not required to pretend his losses did not happen, and I maintain that he is allowed to hate that they happened. The cessation of demand that you speak of, the quiet power of dropping the rope, it is a difficult mercy. It is not a triumphant victory.
No, it is not a triumphant victory in any traditional sense. It is a quiet revolution. Stopping the demand for reality to unhappen is the only way to metabolize suffering.
Right.
The space opens for a completely different kind of power, one that is less dependent on external validation. And the terrifying, beautiful thing is that this choice remains available in ordinary rooms on ordinary mornings, to any man willing to meet the current without first insisting it reverse its course.
And yet we must honor the men who are still fighting the current. The struggle itself is a testament to what they loved and what they lost. The empty chairs remain empty. The bodies age.
The convergence of our perspectives offers no easy fixes today. The reality of this psychological precipice is chilling. The inflammatory markers rise, the sleep fractures, the empty chairs remain empty, the river keeps moving. Beautiful, merciless, exactly as it should be. The storm does not stop. We leave you to decide if you will fight the current or become the shore.